In this video, we're going to look at how to structure your results and discussion sections. This is really important because, particularly in a longer piece of work, like an individual project, because if you have a long section of figure 1 shows, figure 2 shows, figure 3 shows, figure 4 shows, it gets quite boring. And also for the reader, by the time you've got down to figure 23, they haven't really got a memorable message that they're taking away from it. They're just kind of bombarded with lots of results. So it's important to structure your results and your discussion to help you communicate clearly with your reader. So in this video, we're going to look at some of the principles behind structuring, and in particular look at an example from a previous student's work so that we can discuss some of the issues. So the first thing to think about with any section of a report is what is the expected overall flow. With results and discussions, you'd expect, first of all, something kind of telling us about the table or figure. This might sound obvious, but sometimes people include a figure and then kind of expect the reader to find it in there, find the information for themselves, rather than them in the text actually introducing it and then giving the findings. So first of all, you need to be saying, what does this table or what does this figure, what's it about? The next thing you need to do is be stating what the main findings are. This then moves on to a deeper discussion, maybe answering some questions, maybe why questions. For example, why do you think these results have been found? Why do you think you've noticed certain trends? Maybe some how questions, like how convincing are the results? They may be who questions, like who else has had similar findings? Who has had findings that differ from your results? And maybe some what questions, like what implications are there from your research and from your findings. So really those discussion questions. So then in terms of in the longer assignments, we need to think about how we've got that overall flow, but it won't all be in one big long paragraph or even necessarily one section. So we need to think about how we divide it up. First of all, you'll decide whether to have your results and discussion as one section or whether you'll split them into two. If you split them into two, then the results sections will be mainly focusing on the what does this table or figure show and what is the main finding, and the discussion section, unsurprisingly, will be answering those questions that look deeper at what your results show and understanding that and thinking about that. But even if you've decided broadly you're going for results and discussion separately or together, you then need to decide how to group your ideas within the section or sections. And that's really, really important. Like I've said, you don't want to be just saying figure 1, figure 2, figure 3 and using that as your grouping. It's important to have another way to connect them that's more meaningful. One useful way, and that's often very effective, is to think back to what your objectives were and use these to help you organise your findings. This will help you also to have an overall narrative, something that runs the whole way through your project. It seems quite logical when you've said you're going to look for something or to try and find something out, but then your results or discussion, you say how you compare back to those what you have managed to find or not find. So we're going to look at this in an example from a student's report. So this is not an individual project. This was an environmental case study looking at pollution levels and the wind. So we've got here a section from their introduction, first of all. So in this small section of their introduction, they said the report will look at local wind movements with measured pollutant data to inform baseline ambient air quality and result in implications to human environmental health. They also say they'll look at any indication of any headroom that's available. So that was in their introduction. On this next slide, I've just written down the structure, how they structured their discussion section. And you can see a lot of parallels between that introduction and what they were looking for and how they've now divided up their discussion of results. So first we've got wind speed and air quality, wind direction and air quality and human environmental health, and then lastly you might remember the bit about the headroom is the 4.4. Okay, so you can see that those two things are in a way reflecting each other. Once you've divided into the main subsections and identified those, it's important then to think further of how you'll break it down into further subsections maybe, and also into paragraphs. Here we're going to look at how the students divided down further their first section, section 4.1, about the wind speed and air quality. First of all, I'll just talk you through these notes and then we can discuss what they show us and tell us in more detail. So in 4.1.1, we've got nitrogen dioxide, and this started with a paragraph introducing nitrogen dioxide and explaining that it's a really, really key pollutant. In paragraph 2, they identify an urban-suburban-rural relationship where levels of nitrogen dioxide are raised in urban areas and lower in rural areas. In paragraph 3, they talk about a dip in levels of nitrogen dioxide in the summer. And then in paragraph 4, they talk about the slight decrease in nitrogen dioxide when wind speed is elevated. Then we move on to sulfur dioxide, and again the first paragraph is an introduction to sulfur dioxide. Then the second one talks about that urban-suburban-rural relationship again, saying again the elevation when it's in urban areas and the lower levels in rural areas, and also talking about seasonal trends. In paragraph 3, we look at seasonal trends as well as that there are higher concentrations due to the wind. And then lastly, in 4.1.3, the student looked at ozone. So introducing ozone, looking at the summer highs, looking at that in paragraph 2. In paragraph 3, looking at the urban-suburban-rural relationships, and in paragraph 4, looking at the wind and that there's no particularly obvious correlation. So what can we see from this? First of all, I'll say that this was a good student's report, although there's always things that we might write differently, but overall it was a good piece of work. And what can we see that's good here? First of all, we can think about why do we have nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and then ozone? Why is it in that order? Is it just random? I think this has been thoughtfully chosen because nitrogen dioxide was one of the key polluting gases, and so that has gone first. Then why sulfur dioxide, not ozone? Again, I think this is a deliberate and sensible choice. We notice there's lots of similarity in the patterns between nitrogen dioxide and sulfur dioxide. Both show that urban-suburban-rural relationship, and both show that summer dip, for example. However, ozone breaks the pattern, has summer highs, and is more elevated in rural areas than in urban areas. So by following nitrogen and then sulfur, we get the pattern continuing, so which helps it flow more smoothly, and then we move on to ozone, which breaks it. If ozone had been in the middle, it would have felt like it was flipping backwards and forwards and wouldn't have been such a smooth progression. The second thing we can notice that's really good is the paragraph unity. So if we look, for example, at nitrogen dioxide, paragraph 1 is an introduction. Paragraph 2 is the urban-suburban-rural relationship, which is very one topic, one paragraph. Paragraph 3, the summer dip, again, one topic, one paragraph. Paragraph 4, wind speed. So you can see very focused, each paragraph, one main idea. And the same with the ozone. So what might we have said that with any piece of writing, we can often find things that we would do differently. Although this was a great piece of work, is there anything that we would do differently? Well, I would have a look at that paragraph unity in the sulfur dioxide section. In paragraph 2, we've got the urban-suburban-rural relationship and seasonal trends. And then in paragraph 3, we've got the seasonal trends and concentrations in wind. So the seasonal trends is kind of straddling, it's running between both paragraph 2 and paragraph 3. So it doesn't really have such a neat paragraph unity. And I think that one, personally, I would change. It stands out to me that in both nitrogen dioxide and sulfur dioxide, the flow is introduction, urban-suburban rural relationship, seasonal variation, and then wind. Whereas with ozone, they flip the summer and the urban-suburban rural, they flip the order. There might be a reason for this. It might be that the summer was a more obvious trend and that it was a weaker trend, the urban-suburban rural, and in that case it would be sensible. But otherwise it's worth thinking about and questioning, though they may have had a reason for it. But in that sulfur dioxide where you've got the mixing between the two paragraphs, I think that would be an important one to redraft. So then it's looking at where you've got topics that reoccur, how can you maintain the discussion without unnecessary repetition? So we've had this urban-suburban-rural coming up between the 3 different gases, as well as the summer dips, as well as the wind. How can you maintain that discussion? I think the student did this quite effectively. The first time the urban-suburban-rural relationship was mentioned, they said, the concentrations follow an urban-suburban-rural relationship, with average concentrations at Glaisbury 64% lower than at Manchester Piccadilly. This is likely the result of high levels of transport consequent fossil fuel combustion within central Manchester, with transport frequency and therefore emissions decreasing with distance from the city centre. When they next came across this trend into the sulfur dioxide section, they said concentrations on average 80% higher at Manchester Piccadilly than Manchester South. Thus, the urban-non-urban trend is continued. So comparing the two sections, you can see the second time they go into far less detail, far less explanation. But they also say that it is continued. They also draw the reader's attention to the fact that we've heard about this before and it's still going. The third time from the ozone, they state clearly, this breaks the urban-suburban-rural trend in pollutant concentrations demonstrated thus far. So again, that clearly states we've seen something before and now that's not happening anymore, which is useful for helping the reader follow the thread through the section. Okay, so in this video, we've looked at how to structure the results and discussion. I suggest that you try to identify what is the overall anticipated flow of a results and discussion section that a reader expects to find and to work with that. Then you need to work out how to group your ideas within that overall flow. And often this is done effectively by looking back at your aims and objectives. You will still need to break it down further into paragraphs, and you should think about one paragraph, one main idea. To maintain the flow in discussion, though, you need to be looking at what language, what sentences, what phrases you use to help maintain the discussion across paragraphs, so that you're keeping the discussion going, but also avoiding any unnecessary repetition.